A modern city has just endured a horrifying catastrophe. The skyscrapers, once symbols of progress and ambition, now lean and twist as if warped by an invisible force. Shattered glass, exposed steel frames, and patches of greenery growing through the cracks create an atmosphere that feels both desolate and strangely surreal. The main road cutting through the center has become nothing more than a strip of chaos, overturned vehicles, debris scattered everywhere, and not a single sign of life. A dense layer of fog blankets the city, rolling between the buildings like silent waves. Faint light pierces through the clouds above, illuminating fragments of ruin and creating a harsh contrast between light and shadow, giving the entire scene a heavy, icy atmosphere. At the edge of the city, a stretch of green forest remains untouched, like an entirely different world separated from the collapse of civilization. Yet that very contrast makes the scene even more haunting. Nature still survives, while humanity seems to have vanished. The entire panorama evokes a post-apocalyptic feeling, a silent moment after disaster, where time itself seems frozen, and the city exists only as a memory of what it once was. Seen from behind stands a lone warrior, broad shoulders, his signature spiked hair swaying slightly in the violent wind. A cold light from the sky ahead casts a faint glow around his body, as if foretelling an imminent battle. Above him, the sky is no longer a sky, it spirals into a colossal vortex, like a living black hole devouring everything in its path. Layers of clouds churn and twist violently, forming a dark gateway both mesmerizing and terrifying. At its center lies a deep, pitch-black void, as though it is calling out, or threatening. The world around him is drenched in cold blue-gray tones, sharply contrasted by the orange of Goku's outfit, a tiny flame amid a cosmic storm. He stands motionless, yet his posture radiates readiness. No retreat, no hesitation. Even without seeing Goku's face, his unwavering gaze can be felt, fixed directly upon the center of the vortex. This is not merely a scene, it is the moment before destiny, where a warrior prepares to confront something far beyond the limits of this world. The tense expression of a warrior standing amid the ruins of a fallen world. Vegeta's face appears sharply defined, beneath the dim light, his brow furrowed, jaw clenched, every feature carved by rage and an unbreakable will. His eyes are cast downward, yet there is no weakness in them, only the look of someone restraining immense power, as though everything is about to erupt in the very next moment. Behind him stretches a wasteland of destruction. Shattered ancient stone pillars, collapsed structures piled upon one another, twisted wires and debris scattered across the ground. Everything is drowned in cold gray tones, as if life had long since been drained from this place. The distant sky darkens as heavy black clouds gather, foretelling either a storm or an even more brutal battle drawing near. The wind blows through the ruins, carrying dust and the lingering memories of destruction. This moment holds no explosions, no grand movement, only the stillness before fury. One warrior, one ruined world, and a fateful battle waiting to ignite. A forest submerged beneath a thick layer of fog. The silence is unnervingly deep, broken only by the faint crackling of smoldering fire. Towering tree trunks rise like colossal shadows, rigid and cold. But at their roots, flames are burning. Small tongues of fire cling to the bark, spreading and dancing through the darkness, casting a vivid orange glow that stands in stark contrast to the icy blue tones of the night. The ground is drenched, covered in pools of water like a black mirror. The firelight flickers across the surface, creating a scene that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling, as if nature itself were reflecting upon its own destruction. Dense fog rolls through the spaces between the trees, swallowing the horizon and turning everything in the distance into something vague and mysterious. The flickering flames within the mist resemble faint signals, or silent eyes watching from the darkness. There are no people, no clear movement, only fire, water, and shadow. A moment both quiet and threatening. As though the forest is hiding a secret, waiting for someone to step inside and awaken the nightmare lying dormant within. Within a devastated landscape filled with rubble and drifting dust, a faint golden light glows from behind like a distant flame, creating an atmosphere both tense and mysterious. At the center stands a young man with a lean, muscular build, crouched low in a combat-ready stance. His black hair spikes upward, slightly disheveled by wind and motion, emphasizing his intensely focused expression. His eyes are wide and sharp, locked firmly onto a target ahead. Gohan wears a simple purple outfit, stained with dirt and dust, evidence of a brutal battle already fought. His right arm glows brightly, as golden energy gathers in the palm of his hand, radiating with immense power, as though ready to be unleashed. The skin around it appears almost cracked, light seeping through the fissures, suggesting a force beyond control. His posture, one hand pressed against the ground while the other reaches forward, creates the sensation of motion frozen at the peak of intensity, just before a decisive strike is unleashed. Power, determination, and danger converge within a single instant. Like the eye of a god watching over Earth at a moment of destiny. The sky dominates the upper half of the scene, heavy with spiraling black clouds torn apart by a blinding light on the horizon, a light both magnificent and terrifying, like an omen of irreversible catastrophe. From the endless void above, a blazing meteor hurtles downward at unimaginable speed. Its fiery tail stretches behind it like a colossal blade, cutting through the atmosphere and painting the sky in burning shades of orange and red. The air around it seems scorched and distorted, creating a violent streak of light that feels alive, as though it were screaming through the heavens. Below, the earth flickers beneath unstable light. Winding rivers reflect faint glimmers, while clusters of civilization glow weakly like tiny embers before the fury of the cosmos. Thick clouds drift slowly beneath the meteor's glow, transformed into smoldering masses of burning cotton. The entire scene feels suspended between breathtaking beauty and imminent destruction. It is the silence before the storm, a slowed heartbeat before the world changes forever. Close to the ground, where wet stone surfaces reflect the cold light from the sky above, the atmosphere is so still it almost feels possible to hear the breath of the storm gathering overhead. At the center sits a muscular figure with blue skin, cross-legged and facing away from the viewer. His broad back and defined muscles rise like veins carved into stone, conveying both immense strength and deep restraint. His hands rest gently upon his knees, fingers loosely folded in meditation, a state of absolute stillness amid a world on the verge of chaos. Ahead of him, the sky churns with layers of heavy black clouds, torn apart by faint rays of light piercing through. That light is not strong enough to banish the darkness, only enough to reveal more clearly the violence waiting to erupt. Even the wind seems to have fallen silent, as though nature itself is holding its breath in anticipation. The entire scene feels like a tense pause before power is unleashed, a moment where inner strength gathers, and with just one more heartbeat, everything will change. The sky hangs heavy with storm clouds, twisting violently as though heralding an incoming catastrophe. Through the cold gray darkness, a colossal object tears across the heavens at terrifying speed, burning like a living meteor. Its outer shell glows red-hot, cracked open and spewing long trails of fire like a comet's tail, followed by billowing black smoke. Below, the dry and rugged earth is torn apart by overwhelming heat. Streams of lava begin to seep from deep fractures, glowing faintly in the darkness like smoldering wounds across the planet's surface. The orange-red light from the object reflects across the ruined terrain, creating a scene both majestic and horrifying. It is the instant just before impact, when nature and destruction become one. This is not merely a fall. It is a sentence delivered from the sky. Piccolo sits motionless in silence. His body is solid and powerful, his grayish-green skin faintly illuminated beneath the dim stormlight, every muscle standing out as though carved from stone. He sits cross-legged, hands relaxed upon his knees, palms open, a posture of deep meditation, so still that he seems detached from the world around him. His eyes are half closed, his expression cold yet concealing an inner turmoil. The strange markings across his body suggest a power far beyond anything human. Behind him, the sky is bleak and overcast, layers of black clouds stacked endlessly while faint rays of light slip through the gaps like fragile hope amid the apocalypse. The silence is suffocating, no wind, no movement, only the gradual spread of invisible energy filling the air. This is not peace, it is the moment before the storm, a warrior drawing inward, gathering every ounce of strength in preparation for a confrontation that may decide the fate of the entire world. A being that does not belong to the human world, its pale blue skin appears carved from cold stone, smooth yet hiding terrifying power beneath the surface. Two small horns rise from its forehead, while pointed ears extend backward. The faint light from the sky behind filters through layers of cloud and cuts across its face, dividing it into two halves of light and shadow. One side reveals every sharp, merciless feature, while the other sinks into darkness, as though reflecting the dual nature of a warrior, calmness and eruption. Amber-colored eyes stare wide open, unblinking, deep, focused, and filled with vigilance. There is no panic within that gaze, only the clear awareness that something terrible is drawing near. The lips remain tightly sealed, the facial muscles subtly tense, just enough to reveal the gravity of the moment. The world around seems to fall silent, leaving only an invisible breath and that unwavering stare. This is the moment of realization, when the one standing before him is no longer an ordinary battle, but destiny itself knocking at the door. Against the deep blue backdrop of the atmosphere, where the curve of the planet quietly embraces the horizon, a formation of strange objects tears through the sky like bullets fired from the void. Metallic spheres, cold and flawless, slice through the air at terrifying speed, trailing blazing streams of fire behind them like artificial meteors. Below, the ocean and drifting white clouds remain calm and beautiful in silence, completely at odds with the rain of destruction descending from above. There are no explosions, no warnings, only the terrifying silence of space, and an attack that has just begun. That moment erupts like the roar of the apocalypse. At the heart of the ruined city, a colossal fireball blossoms outward, so blinding that it consumes every surrounding detail. The white-hot core of the explosion rapidly expands into burning shades of orange and red, curling upward into a gigantic mushroom cloud stretching toward the heavens like the hand of destruction, tightening its grip upon the world. The ground in the foreground splits apart, puddles reflecting the flickering flames like distorted mirrors of the end of days. Wrecked vehicles, shattered debris, and scorched metal fragments lie scattered everywhere, all hurled and crushed by the invisible shockwaves spreading outward at horrifying speed. On the horizon, the remaining buildings stand silently like ghosts, swallowed by black smoke and firelight. The sky burns orange-red as clouds are torn apart and twisted around the towering pillar of smoke like a newly awakened storm of fire. There is no longer any sound of life, only the aftershock of absolute power unleashed. This is not merely an explosion, it is the end of a world. A colossal metallic sphere burns violently, its cracked outer shell, exposing blazing red fire within like a melting heart. From its body rises a thick column of black smoke, stretching across the frame like a scar tearing through the sky. Sparks scatter outward and fall toward the silent treetops below, as though the forest itself were witnessing the aftermath of catastrophe. The stillness is suffocating, leaving behind only the sensation of heat and destruction. The moment is ripped apart by an unimaginable explosion. The burning metallic sphere suddenly detonates, releasing a blinding halo of white fire that engulfs the entire scene. The intense light erupts like a second sun, dissolving every surrounding detail into an ocean of flames. Fragments of metal are hurled in every direction, spinning through the air like red-hot blades. Thick black smoke coils violently upward, merging with the roaring fire to form a storm of destruction. The trees below are consumed by the blaze, their canopies trembling desperately beneath the overwhelming heat. Within a silent aftermath of catastrophe, the darkened ground is dotted with small lingering flames still smoldering, creating a heavy and somber atmosphere. At the center lies a motionless man upon the earth, his muscular body covered in the marks of a violent collision. His long black hair spreads across the ground, contrasting against skin stained with dirt and scorched by heat. Upon his chest rests a piece of yellow armor accented with blue details, slightly shifted from its original position. His eyes remain closed, his expression faintly tense, as though echoes of the impact still linger within him. Distant flames flicker, painting the scene in vivid orange-red tones. Smoke and ash drift through the air, creating a suffocating atmosphere like the ruins left behind by a devastating catastrophe. At the center, a man lies on his side upon rough terrain. His body is covered in dust and battle scars, while the firelight accentuates every line of his tense yet exhausted muscles. His posture reveals complete fatigue, though a trace of strength still remains, barely holding on. Gohan's face is half buried in shadow and half illuminated by the flames, creating a powerful contrast as though he stands between humanity and some force beyond nature itself. One arm stretches forward, his hand pressed against the ground as if struggling to move or support his own body. Behind him, scattered flames and the blurred background fill the entire frame with tension, a silence heavy with foreboding, like the moment before something immense is about to happen. Skyscrapers rise sharply into the sky, reflecting the faint light of a horizon shifting between sunset and storm. At the center stands a towering structure dominating the skyline, looming like the last remaining symbol of power. Around it stretch countless other buildings, some untouched, others bearing signs of decay, forming a cityscape both magnificent and ruined. Above, the sky churns with heavy black clouds. A bolt of lightning tears through the heavens and strikes near the horizon, its blinding brilliance cutting across the scene like nature's blade, emphasizing the fragility and insignificance of the city below. In the distance, calm water reflects the fading light of day, creating a strange contrast against the storm-filled sky. The entire frame is drenched in cold tones mixed with warm orange hues, making the scene breathtakingly beautiful yet deeply unsettling, as though the city stands on the edge of an approaching catastrophe. A colossal wave surges from the ocean, rising like a towering wall of water and spiraling into a deep tunnel. Dark blue currents, mixed with white foam, are stained by the sunset into shades both icy and burning, creating something mesmerizing yet terrifying. Through the eye of the wave, the skyline of a modern city appears faintly in the distance. Towering buildings stand motionless, fragile, and insignificant before the overwhelming power of nature. One skyscraper rises prominently above the rest, like the final point of resistance before the coming fury. The sky above shifts from deep violet to burning orange, heralding a violent storm. The final light of day reflects across the water, causing every ripple to shimmer like metal, while the core of the wave remains dark and bottomless, as though swallowing everything before it. The entire scene is suffocatingly tense, a moment stretched endlessly just before disaster strikes, as city and ocean confront one another in deadly silence. A modern city filled with skyscrapers rising proudly into the heavens, but in this moment, all of it becomes fragile before the power of nature. A colossal wave, like an endless wall of water, crashes toward the shore with devastating force. The ocean roars as it devours the streets, sweeping away everything in its path. Fragments of glass and concrete hang suspended in the air like shattered memories of a collapsing civilization. At the center of the frame, towering buildings sway violently, some already cracking apart, others still standing but trembling beneath the fury of the storm. The fading light reflects across the chaotic waters, creating a terrifying beauty. No humans appear within the scene, yet that absence only deepens the apocalyptic feeling, as though the entire world has been swallowed in a single moment of destiny. This is not merely a wave, it is a warning, the climax of something cold and unstoppable. Endless space opens like an infinite abyss, where light itself seems consumed by dense darkness. Within that void drift hundreds of meteors, not peacefully, but as though they are being torn apart and violently dragged by an invisible force. The massive rocks collide and shatter, revealing glowing red fissures like molten lava, boiling within. Sparks and fragments burst outward, flickering like dying stars amid the chaos. In the distance, a small yet blinding source of light, perhaps a star, glimmers faintly, the lone witness to the destruction unfolding across the cosmos. A colossal celestial body cuts across the frame, its surface burning red, glowing as though it had just torn through the atmosphere of some distant world. It carries an unimaginable sense of speed and mass, like a gigantic blade ripping through the very fabric of the universe. This is not merely an asteroid belt, it is a battlefield of forces beyond comprehension, where every moment carries the threat of annihilation. Amid the chaos of a universe burning crimson, a figure tears through space at wind-shattering speed, powerful, decisive, like an arrow fired from the very heart of destruction. His body, solid, almost sculpted, reflects the orange-red light of the explosions behind him. Meteors drift around him, shattering into fragments as he passes, leaving behind a violent and unstoppable trail of motion. No spacecraft, no equipment, he himself is the force, the living weapon. His glowing eyes are sharp and utterly focused, as though piercing through everything ahead. There is no fear, no hesitation, only pure will and power. Behind him, space itself appears distorted by the velocity and energy radiating from his body, staining the void with a dark crimson aura. The celestial bodies around him smolder, their molten cracks glowing like wounds carved into the universe itself. Yet amid all that chaos, he is not the victim, he is the center of it. Across a scorched wasteland that looks as though it emerged from the apocalypse itself, a figure walks forward through thick smoke. The ground cracks beneath his feet, tiny embers flickering like the ashes of a battle that has just ended, or perhaps, one that has only just begun. He advances from the blinding light behind him, the glow forming a radiant outline around his muscular body. His face remains hidden in shadow, visible only through glowing eyes like twin flames, cold, unwavering, carrying a pressure that makes the air itself feel heavy. Each step is slow yet absolute, as though the earth must yield before his presence. Smoke coils around his body while sparks rise with every movement, creating the sense that he is not merely walking through the battlefield, he is its very source. The sky behind him is blurred and suffocated by smoke, turning the entire scene into the stage of a modern myth. Just a single step closer, and an uncontrollable power is drawing near. A being emerging from the ashes, carrying the judgment of the very flames he has walked through. A ruined city, its skyscrapers now nothing more than shadows behind thick gray smoke. Fires still burn in scattered pockets, their flickering glow resembling wounds from a battle that has yet to heal. In the foreground stands a young man, calm to the point of coldness amid the chaos. Trunks' pale lavender hair moves gently in the wind, contrasting against the orange flames behind him. His sharp features and focused gaze stare into the distance, as though searching for or preparing to face something greater than the destruction already before him. A sword rests across his back, the silent steel, carrying the promise that the war is far from over. His clothes are dusty and worn, scarred by countless battles, yet Trunks' stance remains firm, unbroken and unshaken. Around him, ruins and fire create a chaotic backdrop, but it is Trunks' stillness that becomes the true center of attention. As though within a collapsed world, he is the final fragment still holding on to hope and resolve. This is not merely a survivor, but a warrior standing amid the ashes of the past, ready to step into the next chapter where hope and destruction have yet to define their boundaries. Android 18, a young woman illuminated by streaks of light cutting across her face, creating dramatic contrasts of brightness and shadow like a deeply emotional cinematic frame. Her blue eyes stare into the distance, cold yet filled with thought, reflecting faint lights ahead like the remnants of a catastrophe that has just occurred. Her blonde hair falls loosely, slightly disheveled, suggesting she has just emerged from a tense situation. Warm light softly illuminates her skin, contrasting sharply with the chaotic background behind her, a space filled with rubble and destruction. Flickering bokeh lights glow like fire or warning signals, reinforcing the dark and urgent atmosphere. She stands amid a world collapsing around her, where every decision has become a matter of survival. A devastated boulevard, as though torn straight from the apocalypse. On both sides of the street, skyscrapers have been ripped apart, their facades collapsed, exposing skeletal concrete frames like the bones of a dead city. Above, the sky is suffocated by rolling black clouds, heavy and pressing downward as though nature itself were crushing what remains of the world. At the center of the frame, fierce fires erupt, their blazing orange light piercing through thick smoke and creating a brilliant focal point against the cold blue-gray palette. Smoke and dust surge along the avenue, merging with the flames into ghostly streaks of light flickering like the city's final breaths. Not a single human figure, not a trace of life remains, only a terrifying silence broken by the lingering echoes of destruction. This is the kind of scene that appears immediately after catastrophe when everything has ended, yet the aftermath still smolders, waiting for something, or someone, to emerge from the smoke. Within a vast ancient corridor, where light slips through cracks in the stone ceiling and falls in pale golden streaks like traces of time itself. Along both sides stand towering stone statues, silent and majestic, like guardians asleep for thousands of years. At the center stands Beerus, a being emerging from darkness, his tall, slender frame carrying the presence of an ancient god, with long pointed ears and cold glowing eyes. His deep purple skin contrasts sharply with the intricate geometric patterns of his garments, evoking supernatural power and absolute control. His footsteps are light yet decisive upon the shattered stone floor, every movement radiating terrifying calm, as though everything around him from the ancient statues to the ruins themselves holds no significance before his presence. The light behind him outlines his body with a faint halo, making him appear both like a descending deity and an omen of destruction. The silence is suffocating. Only the faint sound of loose stones shifting beneath his feet remains, along with the feeling that something far beyond human understanding has awakened within this forgotten ruin. A young face, so close it feels possible to hear his breathing. His skin is marked by dust and faint scratches, remnants of a harsh journey. Cold blue light covers most of his face, while a warm orange glow rises from below, creating a dramatic contrast. Android 17's eyes are wide, sharp, and intensely focused, reflecting fractured lights ahead, perhaps shattered glass or floating debris. There is no panic in his gaze, only heavy contemplation mixed with a silent determination slowly taking shape. Loose strands of hair fall gently across his face, catching the light, while the background fades into soft blurs filled with sparkling points like embers or metallic dust suspended in the air. Everything around him seems drawn into slow motion, a silent second before a choice capable of changing everything. Amid a devastated wasteland, a colossal metallic sphere crashes violently toward the ground. Streams of fire erupt from within, bursting through its fractured shell and forming blazing orange-yellow pillars against thick clouds of black smoke rising into the sky. The earth trembles as shockwaves spread outward, hurling rocks and debris through the air. Metal structures tear apart and twist violently, as though the sphere itself can no longer withstand the pressure building inside. The explosion's light floods the landscape, creating a suffocatingly tense atmosphere, a moment where time itself seems to slow, revealing the full destructive force of the event. An alien creature appears in horrifying detail, as though born from the universe's deepest nightmare. Its pale skin is mottled with blue-gray patches stretched tightly across a gaunt face, every wrinkle and distorted feature painfully visible. Its eyes are wide open, cold yet insane, reflecting the flames burning behind it. Its mouth hangs open in a silent scream, revealing jagged teeth as sharp as blades, arranged chaotically as though obeying no natural law. The heat from the fire behind bathes the scene in vivid orange-red light, clashing violently with the creature's icy skin tone and creating a suffocating atmosphere. Behind it, blurred lights and shadowy figures move within the chaos, suggesting destruction unfolding all around. Everything seems to tremble with the creature's scream, a moment of unbearable tension where fear, savagery, and danger collide within a single frame. Amid a wasteland that looks freshly scarred by the apocalypse, a lone figure stands motionless at the center of the frame, small in size, yet overwhelming in presence. His body is surrounded by a faint blue aura, swirling around his muscles like invisible fire. His spiked hair rises sharply like blades, stretched upward by the immense power surging through him. Gohan's eyes glow a burning red, devoid of emotion, leaving behind only coldness and absolute power. His head tilts slightly downward, casting mysterious shadows across half his face, as though he is restraining a fury capable of tearing the world apart. Around him, the earth fractures and smoke rises in thick columns. Distant flames flicker weakly, illuminating the remnants of a battle that may have already ended, or perhaps has not ended at all. Above, black clouds churn while cold light pierces through their gaps, emphasizing his solitary yet commanding figure. There is no sound, yet the entire scene seems to vibrate from invisible energy, a silent moment before the storm, where supernatural power reaches its peak, heralding an unavoidable eruption. Within a dark forest covered in drifting mist, Android 17 stands motionless like a storm about to erupt. His long black hair falls across half his face, revealing only glowing eyes, sharp as blades piercing through the darkness. His expression radiates fury and determination, creating a suffocating sense of danger. Wearing a black leather jacket and dark clothing, he appears like an anti-hero stepping from legend itself. A blazing blue aura surrounds his body, surging like supernatural fire, causing the air around him to distort and tremble from the energy. Behind him, the forest disappears into chaotic darkness, faint flames flickering between shattered trees like the remnants of a battle that has destroyed everything. The blue light from his aura reflects against the trunks and fog, creating a scene both mystical and threatening. Amid a cracked wasteland resembling the end of the world, Cell stands in deadly silence like a dark god of destruction. His towering body is covered in black and green bioarmor marked with grotesque patterns resembling the hide of an alien predator. His arms are folded across his chest, calm yet radiating the absolute authority of someone who has no need to prove his strength. His face is cold and merciless, crimson eyes glowing in the darkness like embers from hell. The sharp crest rising above his head resembles the crown of a monster, transforming him into something both terrifying and arrogant, a king of annihilation, a tyrant born from nightmares. Around him stretches the landscape of the apocalypse. Cracked earth with golden light seeping through the fissures like lava burning beneath the surface. Jagged black stone pillars rise toward the heavens like colossal spears surrounding a dead land. In the distance, lightning tears across the storm-filled sky, illuminating the world for a brief instant before returning everything to icy darkness. A villain who does not need to scream, his mere presence is enough to make the entire world tremble. The city streets have become a corridor leading directly into the apocalypse. The asphalt is shattered, scattered with broken concrete, snapped tree branches, and twisted metal like the ruins of a world crushed apart. Abandoned cars lie overturned along the roadside, doors flung open and windows shattered, as though the population fled in desperate panic only moments earlier. Above the night sky, a colossal vortex twists like a monster born from black clouds. The massive tornado descends into the center of the avenue, spiraling with terrifying force and glowing with an icy blue light from within. It no longer feels like a natural phenomenon, it resembles a gateway of destruction opening within the heart of the city. Streetlights bend beneath the violent winds, their yellow glow flickering weakly before the overwhelming power of the storm. Trees are ripped from the ground, branches and leaves spiraling upward into the chaos, creating the sensation that everything is being dragged toward that deadly center. The sky is suffocated by layers upon layers of rolling black clouds, making the atmosphere feel heavy and unbearable, like the final moment before judgment. Civilization has collapsed, and humanity can do nothing but watch as an unstoppable force devours the world. Amid seas of fire and smoking ruins, the villain emerges silently like the embodiment of catastrophe itself. His body is compact yet powerful, covered in glossy white and purple bioarmor, reflecting the crimson flames surrounding him. Every step he takes is slow and deliberate, as though nothing in existence could possibly stand in his way. Frieza keeps his head lowered, golden eyes glowing coldly beneath the shadows covering his face. He does not need to roar or boast, his silence is what makes him terrifying. It is the calmness of someone utterly familiar with destruction. Scratches across his body reveal that he has just come from battle, yet instead of weakening him, they only make him appear even more merciless. Behind him lies a vision of hell on earth, blackened metal, twisted wreckage of vehicles, towering columns of smoke swallowing the blood-red evening sky. Fires erupt from piles of ruin, surrounding Frieza with flickering halos of orange light, as though the entire world were burning simply to illuminate his arrival. The city has fallen, and only the footsteps of the conqueror echo through the ashes. Amid a barren desert coated in red dust, Omega Shenron emerges from burning ruins like the incarnation of Judgment Day. His enormous body is packed with muscles sculpted like white stone, veins bulging beneath pale skin that feels both biological and monstrous. Sharp black spikes run along his back and shoulders, transforming him into a living engine of war. His face is twisted with rage, teeth clenched tightly, cold eyes radiating pure killing intent. Across his chest are mysterious black orbs aligned like the markings of an ancient power. His fists tighten at his sides, ready to crush anything daring enough to stand before him. His mere presence alone makes the atmosphere heavy with terror. Behind him burns the wreckage of a colossal spacecraft, orange-red flames devouring twisted metal while thick black smoke climbs into the sky. In the distance, barren mountains stretch beneath a dull gray horizon, making the landscape feel even more isolated and merciless. The firelight reflects across Omega Shenron's pale body, creating a haunting contrast between light and darkness. This is the moment the ultimate monster awakens, where the battlefield has already been destroyed, hope is nearly extinguished, and only the footsteps of the destroyer echo across the dead desert. Across the cold gray ocean trembling beneath a storm, a colossal metallic sphere slowly rises from the water like an alien object awakening from the depths. Its surface is covered in black and silver armored plates lined with mechanical grooves, scratched and weathered as though it has endured countless wars across time itself. Its impossibly perfect shape clashes against the chaotic forces of nature surrounding it, creating an overwhelming sense of mystery and menace. Behind it stretches the skyline of a coastal city, its skyscrapers standing in ominous silence. The energy of modern civilization is gone, the city now resembles a stage waiting for disaster to arrive. White lightning tears across the black clouds overhead, illuminating the scene for an instant before plunging everything back into suffocating darkness. The water around the sphere ripples endlessly, reflecting its massive shadow like a bottomless abyss. There are no explosions, no frantic movements, only the eerie stillness before the storm, making the object's presence even more terrifying. It does not need to attack, its mere existence is enough to make the entire city hold its breath. What is coming does not belong to Earth, and it is already too late to stop it from reaching shore. The atmosphere is thick with smoke and dust, as though the aftermath of a brutal battle still lingers. Dim light filters through the haze, covering everything in cold gray tones of despair. At the center kneels Piccolo, a green-skinned being with a compact yet powerful build, upon rough stone ground. His body strains with effort, every muscle sharply visible beneath dark green skin, veins and markings along his arms, standing out like signs of restrained power. One hand is clenched into a fist and pressed against the ground, as though he is forcing himself to rise after a devastating fall. Piccolo's face remains lowered, his sharp eyes glaring upward from beneath his brow with determination and fury. His pointed ears extend outward, intensifying his fierce appearance. His dark clothing, torn and covered in dust, shifts in the wind carrying ash through the battlefield. The world around him fades into haze, shattered rocks, and ruined terrain barely visible behind him like an abandoned war zone. It is the heavy silence before eruption, as though Piccolo is gathering every ounce of willpower to stand and continue the fight. The scene unfolds beneath a sky, burdened with black storm clouds, cold light falling across a wasteland torn apart by war. Faint fires flicker in the distance while smoke rises in waves, setting the stage for a suffocatingly tense moment. Android 18, a young woman with short blonde hair swept wildly by the wind, stands at the center. Strands of hair brush across her delicate yet intensely focused face. She wears a simple dark shirt beneath a dusty denim jacket, the clothing of someone who has stepped out of chaos, not a traditional warrior, yet someone carrying extraordinary power within. In her palm burns a radiant blue energy source, glowing fiercely like a miniature star. A streak of light erupts outward as though tearing through space itself, giving the impression that her power is surpassing all limits. She stands there like the eye of an unbroken storm. Everything around her seems to fade away, surrendering to this single moment of destiny. Beneath a darkened sky, a massive structure, a pyramid, begins to shatter from within, enormous stone blocks, ripped apart, and hurled violently into the air. Hundreds, thousands of fragments scatter in every direction, from tiny pebbles to massive slabs of stone, all suspended midair as though gravity itself has ceased to exist. Dust surges upward in a giant gray wave, swallowing the base of the structure and spreading outward, turning the atmosphere suffocating and threatening. Weak light from above cuts through the dust and spinning debris, creating flashing streaks that highlight every jagged edge and chaotic movement. It feels as though space itself is cracking apart, as though an invisible force has erupted from the pyramid's core. This is not simply collapse, it is an explosion of power, a moment where all natural laws are broken. Everything pauses within that instant before gravity's fury drags it all back down, burying everything beneath an ocean of stone and dust. Within the heart of a city lined with towering skyscrapers, the main avenue suddenly transforms into a raging ocean. Massive waves surge upward as though the entire sea has burst into the center of the metropolis. Buildings tremble violently on both sides of the street, windows exploding outward, while concrete and steel are ripped apart and hurled into the air within the roaring storm. A cold blue-gray light blankets the entire scene, interrupted only by flashing red lights from police cars abandoned along the roadside. The imagined sounds blend together, sirens screaming, metal colliding, water roaring like an invisible beast. In the foreground, humanity appears fragile and insignificant. Panicked civilians run desperately through the streets, bent forward against the violent wind and incoming flood. Some stumble across the soaked pavement while others pull one another away from the disaster, swallowing everything around them. At the center of the avenue, the wave charges forward like an unstoppable wall of water, a moment where nature completely overwhelms mankind. The entire scene carries the essence of the apocalypse, violent, chaotic, and hopeless, like the final seconds before total collapse. The moment of eruption in a battle for survival. Goku, a warrior with hair standing upright, glowing gold like molten metal. His eyes blaze with light, sharp and almost feral, as though he has surpassed every human limit. Veins bulge across his forehead while his face twists within a furious scream, a cry not only of pain, but of power finally released after being restrained for far too long. Around him, the earth cracks apart and chunks of stone rise into the air, drawn upward by invisible energy. Golden streaks of lightning surge through the fissures and across his body like living electricity, making the atmosphere tremble violently. The lighting is dark and highly contrasted, emphasizing every detail upon his face, every bead of sweat, every scar, every flash of light within his eyes. The background fades into blur, leaving behind only chaos and the crushing pressure of energy exploding outward. Upon a jagged cliff shrouded in mist, a vulture stands motionless like the embodiment of death itself. Layers of gray feathers are brushed by cold light, creating a harsh and barren appearance. Its featherless head tilts slightly downward while crimson eyes glow like embers, radiating instinctive survival and cruelty. Within its sharp talons rests a fresh piece of flesh still dripping blood. Its curved, powerful beak tears through strands of meat, pulling apart dark red sinew. The imagined sounds feel dry and brutal, the tearing of flesh, the grinding of bone, the wind screaming through the rocks. Behind it, distant mountains disappear into blue-gray mist, making the creature appear even more isolated and terrifying. Everything seems to hold its breath, surrendering to a primal moment. The survivor feeds, and life continues through the death of another. A city once considered the symbol of civilization has now become a living monument to nature itself. From above, the skyscrapers still stand, but they no longer possess the coldness of concrete and glass. Instead, they are consumed by greenery. Trees spill through shattered windows, vines crawl across facades, and rooftops disappear beneath waves of vegetation like the silent tide of time. The avenues once crowded with people have become jungle corridors where dense canopies block out the sunlight. At the center stretches a vast green expanse resembling an endless park, erasing every boundary between architecture and wilderness. Smaller structures below are almost entirely buried beneath foliage, with only a few rooftops visible through the sea of leaves. Far away, water glimmers beneath sunlight, contrasting against storm clouds gathering along the horizon, half hope, half despair. The light is soft, yet sharp, cutting between the buildings and creating deep contrasts of shadow and brightness. There are no humans left, no artificial movement. This is not destruction through violence, but through time itself. A world after humanity has vanished, where the city has become a forest, and time remains the only director left. A street once filled with life now remains frozen in eerie silence. Towering buildings still rise along both sides of the road, but the shell of civilization has begun to decay. Vines and wild plants spill through every window, crawling across the facades like new veins, replacing old concrete. Some balconies have collapsed, leaving shattered brick and broken glass scattered like remnants of a forgotten era. The main road stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Yellow lane markings still remain, but they are interrupted by fallen branches, broken trunks, and abandoned vehicles coated in dust. One car rests tilted against the roadside, its door left half open as though its owner fled in desperation and never returned. Sunlight filters through dense green canopies overhead, casting fragmented patterns of light across the asphalt. There are no engines, no human voices, only the soft wind brushing through leaves and a silence so deep it feels possible to hear time itself passing. The atmosphere is post-apocalyptic, yet not violent rather, it is the feeling of slow decay. And within that scene, the endless straight road feels like an invitation, or an unanswered question: what happened to this world? Beneath heavy rain, every drop falls slowly, stretching time itself. Gohan lies motionless upon shattered ground, his face turned toward the cold pavement. His soaked hair clings to his forehead and cheeks, where scratches and bruises still bear the marks of a recent battle. Cold gray light covers his body, highlighting every tense muscle along his bare arm while rainwater streams across his skin like liquid mercury. His purple shirt, drenched with water, clings tightly to his body, heavy yet fragile, as though it could be swept away by the storm at any moment. The world around him blurs into haze, leaving only scattered debris and wet ground, reflecting faint light from the overcast sky. The silence is suffocating, broken only by the sound of rain falling like the slow heartbeat of the world itself. Piccolo leaned against a crumbling wall overgrown with vines, his elongated pointed ears and weathered face tilted toward the sky, as though searching for an answer from the endless void above. His tattered clothing clung to his solid frame, stained with both old and fresh wounds. The purple cloak draped over his shoulders hung heavy and damp, swaying faintly in the soft wind, carrying the breath of the ruined city in the distance. Behind him, the skyline appeared blurred, collapsed, buildings consumed by nature, like fading memories. The silence was so profound, it was almost possible to hear Piccolo's slow breathing, a moment of contemplation suspended between ruin and rebirth, between despair and a flicker of hope. The face of the greenskin being emerged in sharp detail, as if carved from ancient stone. Wrinkles, cracks, and scars spread across his skin. Soft light filtered through the green leaves above, falling across his face like fragments of fading memories. Piccolo's eyes burned red with deep exhaustion as he looked upward, not searching, but confronting something invisible and unavoidable. The purple cloak resting on his shoulders, torn and covered in dust, lay still like a body drained of all strength. Heavy footsteps echoed like the drums of war. White-silver armored boots streaked with cold purple advanced forward in terrifying unison, each step kicking dust into the air and leaving marks across the devastated road. Through the haze of dust lay the ruins of a destroyed city, collapsed structures, shattered frameworks, and scattered fragments of metal. The atmosphere was drenched in gloomy gray tones, the light filtered through a sky heavy with clouds. The army warriors clad in high-tech armor moved like an emotionless machine. The clashing of metal, the crushing of stone beneath their feet, and their synchronized marching reverberated like the warning of an unstoppable invasion. A cold, overwhelming atmosphere hung in the air, and what was approaching was no longer human. Frieza, appearing as a half-human, half-machine entity, stood beneath the dim light. His glossy white armor reflected the cold glow, streaked with dark crimson patches like dried blood, creating a sensation both pristine and horrifying. His eyes glowed a vivid red, not the gaze of a living being, but the signal of a machine, awakening. Every trace of emotion had been replaced by calculation. His clenched teeth revealed a twisted fury, a deeply human expression appearing on a face no longer fully human. Only the gray tones of ruin remained around him, making him stand out as the center of a nightmare. Light slashed through the dust, casting razor-sharp reflections across the metallic surfaces. It was a single suffocating instant of silence, where rage was compressed, preparing to erupt. No sound was needed, those burning red eyes alone carried a clear message: he had not come to negotiate. Amid the remnants of a forgotten world, a towering warrior stood motionless at the center, arms crossed over his chest, his posture regal yet burdened with thought. Silver metallic armor gleamed beneath natural light, intricately engraved and fitted tightly around his muscular body, like a living statue. A helmet crowned with two sweeping horns rose above him, forming a silhouette both majestic and terrifying. Around him stretched a city consumed by nature. Skyscrapers were wrapped in vines, trees bursting through windows and creeping into every crack of the concrete. The road ahead was split apart, weeds pushing through shattered cement as it disappeared into a silence so deep it felt unsettling. Soft daylight filtered through the canopy above, scattering shifting patterns of light and shadow across the ground in his armor. There were no signs of human life, no movement, only the sound of wind brushing through hollow structures. Then his face spread into a grin so wide it became disturbing, as though he had just witnessed something that filled him with profound satisfaction. Grayish-purple skin showed beneath the armor, rough and alien in appearance. His eyes narrowed with a sharp, icy gaze, and his laughter seemed to echo through the empty city, shattering the silence of abandonment. A laugh rang out among the ruins, like a declaration that in this collapsed world, the one standing here was the true victor. A solitary figure sat upon the shattered concrete edge of a ruined building. His pale purple hair stood out faintly against the blue-gray tones of the world around him, like a fragile remnant of surviving life. Trunks sat motionless, shoulders slightly hunched within an old black jacket, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the city stretched into the haze. Ahead, skyscrapers covered in vines stood silently as nature slowly reclaimed every window and every wall. The city still remained, but it was no longer humanity's city. It had become a forgotten memory. Weeds and branches pushed through cracked cement while concrete and steel decayed beneath them. Gentle daylight washed the entire scene in pale tones, giving it the feeling of a morning after the apocalypse, beautiful, yet unbearably sad. There was no grand movement, no conflict, only a rare moment of stillness. Yet that silence carried more weight than any dialogue, as if he were looking upon everything that had been lost and wondering whether anything was still worth saving. The highway curved below, now empty and severed apart, while dense greenery swallowed the entire city. No trace of humanity remained, no cars, no lights, only silence. The dim light of early morning covered the landscape in a veil of mist, blurring the horizon where distant buildings disappeared into smoke and dust. This was a post-apocalyptic world where nature had become the final heir, and humanity remained only as a faint shadow within the vastness of the scene. Faraway apartment blocks stood motionless like concrete ghosts, fading into the dense gray fog. An old helicopter rested motionless atop a rooftop, its fuselage consumed by vines and moss, as though nature had patiently devoured every fragment of humanity's memory. The rotors no longer turned, yet black birds still cut through the air above, leaving streaks of chaotic motion across the silent sky. The cabin door hung partially open, and beside it, a human skeleton sat motionless upon a metal crate, upright and silent, as though waiting for a flight that would never come. No tragedy was explicitly told, yet the silence echoed like an endless lament. Cold light coated everything in a bluish-gray tone, emphasizing the contrast between rusted metal and the wild greenery spreading across the ruins. Life had departed, but its traces remained quiet and haunting. Natural light filtered gently through the shattered window behind her, falling almost mercifully upon the face of the girl leaning against the moss-covered wall. Her blonde hair was slightly tangled, her pale skin marked by a dried streak of blood running from her temple down her cheek, a fragile, yet haunting reminder of whatever had happened before. Android 18 kept her eyes closed. It was impossible to tell whether she was asleep, unconscious, or simply too exhausted to continue resisting. Her body rested limp, one hand loosely placed on her lap, every small detail radiating exhaustion. Her faded denim jacket, dusty and worn, looked as though it had endured a brutal journey alongside her. Around her, nature quietly reclaimed the space. Moss spread across the walls, vines crept through every crack, and soft green light reflected from the trees outside. There were no longer any signs of the modern world, only silence and cold emptiness. Caught between fragility and pain, her blue eyes opened wide, reflecting confusion mixed with resilience, as though she were confronting something both terrifying and impossible to escape. An old stone road stretched into the distance, its cracked and uneven slabs exposing patches of green moss creeping through like memories reclaiming forgotten ground. Two deer with brown coats speckled in white lowered their heads to graze calmly on grass growing between the stones. They moved slowly and peacefully, as though this place had never belonged to humanity. Their presence carried a sense of serenity, yet also something haunting nature silently reclaiming what had once been lost. On either side of the road stood ruined structures, their windows dark and empty, their walls buried beneath hanging vines. Weak light filtered through the leaves overhead, scattering mottled patterns across the path and creating an atmosphere of desolation. Two young deer stood in the foreground, their slender legs frozen upon the moss-covered stones. They lifted their heads, dark eyes reflecting caution and curiosity, as though they had sensed something unnatural nearby. Moisture still clung to the stone and moss, giving the entire scene a cold and unsettling stillness. Near the ground itself, where moss and weeds crept through the cracks of the ancient road, Vegeta lay on his side, motionless, his face pressed against the cold earth. His eyes remained half open, lost somewhere between awareness and emptiness, as though he had just survived a battle whose price still lingered unresolved. The blue armor clinging to his muscular body was scratched, caked in mud, and stained with dried blood. One white shoulder plate was split apart, exposing the marks of violent impact. His arms stretched forward, metal joints covered in dirt, like a final effort abandoned midway. A fallen warrior in a world that had already changed forever. The stone-paved road had been swallowed by nature. Two rows of towering structures faced each other like concrete skeletons, their windows hollow, walls cracked, and vines hanging down like green scars. Krillin, a bald man, lay collapsed upon the street, his body twisted slightly as though he had been violently thrown down. His orange-brown clothing was torn and covered in dust and scars from brutal collisions. One arm pressed tightly against his chest while the other dangled lifelessly against the damp stone, as though his strength had long since faded. His face rested against the ground, eyes closed. Around him, weeds pushed through every crack in the stones, green leaves covering the path, while patches of moss spread silently, as if erasing humanity's footsteps. The cold gray light of the sky washed over the scene, not harsh, but enough to illuminate the desolation and emptiness. Frieza, a humanoid creature encased in gleaming biological armor, reflected the cold light of the gray sky. His body appeared both perfect and deeply alien. His narrowed eyes carried a sharp, calculating gaze, as though contemplating something far beyond ordinary emotion. In his hand rested a human skull, aged, cracked, and covered in the dust of time. He raised it to eye level, studying it like an object. Or perhaps a memory. A faint smile curled across his lips, not with joy but with arrogance, mixed with contempt, as though he were staring at the remains of a failed species. Everything happened within a single instant, yet enough to carve terror into memory forever. Frieza no longer stood silently reflecting. His eyes blazed crimson, glowing like embers within ash, radiating fury and absolute disdain. His metallic hand tightened, and within a brief moment, the skull was crushed. A dry cracking sound echoed, followed instantly by violent shattering. Bone fragments and dust exploded outward like a miniature detonation. Fine particles mixed with razor-sharp shards, forming a chaotic wave of debris. Every fragment spun through the air, reflecting the cold gray light of the ruined sky. The crushing force did not merely destroy the object in his hand, it felt like a declaration. Nothing remained. No memory, no mercy. Behind him, the ruins of the city trembled within the dust clouds, emphasizing the overwhelming dominance of the figure standing at the center. A being who was the very cause of the apocalypse. The Eiffel Tower stood towering over a Paris consumed by time and nature. From above, the city no longer resembled the symbol of light and life it once had been. The once crowded boulevards had vanished beneath untamed greenery, trees burst through rooftops and crept into shattered windows. Buildings leaned at broken angles, many collapsed entirely, leaving empty scars across the urban landscape. A thin layer of mist covered everything, making the city appear distant and dreamlike like the fading memory of a civilization long extinguished. Then, suddenly, shattering the silence, a massive flock of blackbirds swept across the sky. They spiraled in dense formations, casting shadows across the tower like an omen of darkness. No more human voices, no more rhythm of life, only nature reclaiming every inch of the city, and wild creatures becoming its new rulers. The Eiffel Tower loomed like a giant exhausted by time. The crisscrossing iron beams, once symbols of engineering mastery, were now rusted and warped, torn apart by nature. Vines and wild grass hung down from the tower's levels like green wounds silently spreading. At the foot of the tower stretched a long concrete corridor, flanked by abandoned structures with doors left wide open, dark as bottomless mouths. The ground was cracked, littered with debris and creeping roots, and every imagined footstep echoed through the terrifying silence. And then, at the far left of the frame, a slight movement. A leopard emerged, its muscular body and golden black fur standing out against the mossy greens and dusty grays. It stepped from the shadows, eyes wary, yet commanding. Humans no longer belonged here, only the new predators remained. No music. No dialogue. Only the wind whistling through the hollow steel frame, the rustling leaves, and the deep-breathing rhythm of nature reclaiming the world. A symbol of human civilization now stood as the backdrop for a new wild order, one where humanity was no longer the center. Sunlight pierced through the canopy above, casting mottled patches across the ancient stone floor, a warm light that somehow made the scene feel lonelier than ever. Ahead stood the Colosseum, once a symbol of power and history, now silent like a monument forgotten by time. Towering stone arches rose in layers. Walls that had once stood firm were now chipped and broken, revealing dark empty gaps like hollow eye sockets. Vines and wild plants spread across the stone steps, creeping through every crack. The ground was uneven, scattered with broken stones like remnants of ancient battles, but now, there was no clash of swords, no roar of crowds. Only silence remained, the sound of wind passing through empty corridors, and leaves trembling softly like whispers from the past. The path led deep into the heart of the arena, as though stepping into the memory of a civilization long extinguished. Everything was still there, but its meaning had vanished. A murky green light filtered through the cloudy water, creating an atmosphere both mysterious and suffocating. Goku, a muscular man with sharply defined muscles beneath taut skin, was trapped within the cramped confines of a rusted metal pipe. His face was covered by a breathing mask, the air hose curling like a fragile lifeline. His eyes were wide open, filled with tension and vigilance, as though he sensed an invisible danger lurking nearby. Tiny air bubbles escaped and floated upward, catching the dim light and making time itself feel slower in this life-or-death moment. His arms stretched outward, as if trying to steady himself or escape the confinement. The ground was split apart, broken stones soaked with mud and water reflecting the cold light of the gray sky. Gohan collapsed to the ground, his body tense as though fighting against his own limits. His torn purple gi clung tightly to his mud-stained skin, revealing muscles trembling from exhaustion. One arm was planted firmly into the ground, fingers clenched so hard it seemed he might crush the stones beneath him. His teeth were gritted, eyes tightly shut, veins bulging visibly at his temples. This was not merely physical pain, it was the pressure of willpower, of a battle not yet finished. Droplets of water slid down his face, mixing with dirt, to create a portrait both raw and emotional. A battle had just destroyed everything. A moment between collapse and rising again, where a warrior prepared to ignite one final time. Daylight filtered through the leaves above, falling onto moss-covered ground where nature was slowly swallowing the ruins of a forgotten structure. Leaning against a moss-covered stone wall, Android 18 sat curled up, her body consumed by exhaustion and pain. Her messy blonde hair framed a pale face streaked with dried blood running from her temple to her cheek. Her eyes were half closed, not quite unconscious, but as though she were struggling to hold onto the last fragment of awareness amid the dizziness. Her hands trembled faintly as she looked down at them, as if trying to confirm that she still existed, that she still had control over something in the world collapsing around her. A dark red trail of blood extended from a cut along her cheekbone, dried into sharp lines like cracks in a statue. Android 18 rested her head against the moss-covered wall, eyes shut, her eyelashes trembling slightly as she fought against the dizziness. Her breathing was heavy and uneven, each breath seeming to carry the full weight of the pain swelling in her chest. One hand clenched weakly, trembling a faint reflex to preserve the last trace of control. Android 18 sat slumped at the base of the wall, legs stretched out helplessly, her body looking completely drained. Her mud-stained shoes lay motionless in front of her, heavy like the journey she had endured. Her wrinkled denim jacket, torn slightly at the shoulder, clung to her slumping frame, every breath slow and deep, as though she were struggling to remain conscious. Her face hung low, eyes unfocused, the bloodstain still visible on her cheek, a small detail, yet enough to pull the viewer back into the harsh reality. The violent tension from before was gone, replaced by a state suspended between consciousness and delirium, between surrender and resistance. Would she collapse completely, or gather the last of her strength to rise and continue forward? A cracked stone road, covered in green moss and creeping vines, had been consumed by time and nature. On both sides stood ruined buildings, windows hollow like lifeless eye sockets, all swallowed beneath wild vegetation, creating an atmosphere both silent and threatening. Frieza, a white and purple humanoid entity, strode forward powerfully. His body gleamed, nearly flawless, with sharply sculpted muscles like carved stone. His long tail curved behind him, moving with each step, giving him an appearance both agile and deadly. His gaze was cold and focused, as though nothing could stand in the way of his objective. Behind him, hundreds, perhaps thousands of identical warriors advanced in dense formation. They moved in perfect synchronization, forming a living metallic wave surging through the ruins of a fallen world. Dust and moisture rose from the ground with every step, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The dim light from the gray sky cast a heavy gloom over everything. No sunlight, only the crushing weight of a hopeless day. An unavoidable invasion, a soulless army, led by an absolute ruler. The massive army suddenly rose into the air, not walking the ground, but floating like metallic ghosts. At the center, Frieza, the leader with the striking white and purple body, spread his arms wide like a god awakening. He did not need to speak or issue commands. His mere presence made the atmosphere suffocating. Around him, hundreds of identical warriors hovered in flawless formation. White streams of energy burst downward from beneath them, forming vertical pillars of smoke that slammed into the ground, shaking the air like the silent roar of an enormous war machine. A colossal circular structure stood nearby like an ancient arena swallowed by time. Tiered rows of stone archways surrounded it, curving in perfect symmetry like layers of memory stacked upon one another, each dark doorway hiding secrets never revealed. The central ground was cracked into huge slabs of cold gray stone, silent as though it had once witnessed terrible battles before being abandoned. But nature had not forgotten. Vines hung from the walls like green curtains, threading through every crack, and slowly embracing the ancient architecture in an unstoppable invasion. Soft light descended from above, pouring through the open center of the structure, creating interwoven bands of shadow and light that made the scene feel both sacred and ruined. No humans, no movement. Only a dense silence, as though the place itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to awaken. At the center, descending from the sky, stood a solitary figure, Frieza. His small form moved slowly across the cold stone floor, beneath the immense structure. No audience, no cheering, only dense silence, holding its breath in anticipation. Light from the pale gray sky poured down through the circular opening of the ruined architecture, illuminating the center where he stood. A natural stage. The moment carried the feeling of calm before a storm, silent, tense, and full of promise for a confrontation that would shake these ancient ruins to their core. A creature not belonging to the human world, skin pale, gray and smooth like marble, crossed by fine cracks like scars from forgotten battles. The glossy purple dome atop his head reflected the dim light from the sky above, creating a beauty both perfect and terrifying. His eyes burned bright red. They did not merely glow, they seemed to incinerate everything within their gaze, carrying rage, contempt, and an absolute power that required no proof. His mouth opened in a silent roar, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Every muscle in his face tightened, every feature screaming with rage restrained to its limit. Everything else was consumed by the overwhelming presence of this being. All things seemed insignificant before a creature born to dominate and destroy. A colossal dome-shaped structure stood before them, once a symbol of technology and ambition. The sign reading Capsule Corp still remained, but the once brilliant yellow paint had faded and peeled, worn away mercilessly by time. The entire building had been overtaken by nature. Vines hanging down like green scars, moss covering every surface, and bushes growing atop the roof, transforming the structure into a living hill rather than a modern headquarters. Two circular towers rose on either side, perhaps once used for observation or research, now standing motionless like eyes that had lost their sight. The windows were pitch black, showing no signs of life, only reflecting the pale blue sky above. Around it stretched a futuristic city filled with smaller white domes arranged like the cells of a sleeping organism. No movement. No smoke. No sound. Daylight illuminated the scene, almost cruelly too bright, too peaceful for a place so clearly abandoned. That contrast made the image feel colder than any darkness. This was not merely a forgotten building. This was the ruin of an era, where human intelligence had once reached its peak before everything collapsed in silence. The ground exploded as though pierced from beneath by an invisible force. Earth, concrete, and metal hurled violently into the air within a towering column of dust. Debris spun wildly, crashing into itself midair, forming a chaotic symphony of destruction. At the center of the eruption, a lone figure shot skyward. His body hovered in midair, fists clenched, every muscle tense as though containing an overwhelming power source. His orange G blazed against the blue sky, standing in sharp contrast to the swirling gray dust below. An invisible force propelled him upward, leaving beneath him the gigantic structure torn apart. Rocks and debris continued to rise, spiraling around him as though caught in an unseen vortex. This was no longer waiting. No longer silence. This was the moment power was unleashed, raw, overwhelming, and unstoppable. The gray-blue sky was torn apart by blazing rays of sunlight, piercing through thick clouds, shining down upon a ruined city swallowed by nature. Towering skyscrapers leaned crookedly, covered in vines and moss like the skeletal remains of a fallen civilization. Goku streaked through the air at terrifying speed, cutting through a lush green canyon formed by overgrown vegetation spreading through the city. A white trail of wind tore behind him, emphasizing his immense speed and superhuman power. The sound of roaring wind and leaves whipping violently through the air blended with the rising intensity of the soundtrack. Ahead, sunlight formed a radiant focal point, like a final destination or a fate waiting for him. A journey through the ruins of the world, where hope and life still burned amid destruction. The face of Piccolo harsh, intense, and filled with pressure. Gray-green skin appeared with deep wrinkles like cracks carved into ancient stone. His eyes burned red like smoldering embers, locked onto an invisible target ahead, creating a tension so sharp it felt as though it could be cut with a knife. That gaze was not merely shock, it was a warning. His teeth clenched tightly, revealing sharp, tightly pressed fangs, carrying the sensation of a roar trapped within his throat. There was no movement, no distinct sound, only heavy breathing and the silence before the storm. Every emotion was compressed within the eyes of a warrior about to unleash the decisive blow. Amid the ruins of an abandoned city, where cracked concrete walls had been overtaken by vines and moss, a body lay motionless upon damp ground covered in wild grass. It was Vegeta, the once proud warrior now fallen, his face turned to one side, eyes shut tight. His familiar blue and white armor was scratched and stained with mud, marked by the remnants of a brutal battle. A small cut on his forehead still bled faintly, like the final trace of the confrontation that had passed. On his back stood a massive eagle, wings spread wide, its sharp talons gripping him possessively. It lowered its head, the curved beak hovering close to the warrior's skull. Its outstretched wings cast a heavy shadow over the motionless body beneath. The daylight was soft, yet cold, slipping through the gaps between ruined buildings and cutting through thin dust suspended in the air. Everything seemed frozen, no sound, only the eerie stillness after the storm. A pile of broken bricks rose from the field of wild grass. Upon it stood two eagles, silent, wings half folded, their sharp eyes resembling guardians of the wasteland. They were in no hurry, merely watching, patient, as though they had grown accustomed to scenes like this. Daylight coated the landscape in a pale hue, filtering through thin mist and drifting dust. There was almost no movement, only a gentle wind stirring the grass and dry leaves. That silence carried the true weight of the scene. This was no longer a battlefield, but the aftermath of war. The creatures standing above became silent witnesses. A wordless moment where time itself seemed frozen, the collapse and loneliness of a lost world. In the middle of the ruined street, an old car rested motionless, its silver metal body dulled and eroded by weather and time. Bright green vines crawled across the hood, slipping into every crack and doorway, embracing the vehicle as though nature were gently reclaiming a relic of the past. On both sides, ruined skyscrapers stood in silence, their facades peeling away, windows dark like empty eye sockets. Trees and plants grew through balconies and cracks, turning the entire street into a forest imprisoned within concrete. Daylight filtered through leaves and thin clouds, bathing the scene in soft, cool tones. Only a few leaves trembled lightly in the wind. The car sat at the center of the frame like a silent witness. It was no longer merely a vehicle, it was memory. A remnant of an era when humanity once ruled this place. Now it was covered, consumed, transformed into part of the wild landscape. A vast boulevard stretched endlessly into the distance, yet there was no trace of human life remaining. The asphalt road was cracked apart, chunks of concrete scattered like open wounds of a collapsed civilization. On both sides stood skyscrapers blending classical and modern architecture, now reduced to ruined concrete shells with windows black as hollow eye sockets. Vines and wild vegetation crawled across the walls, spilling over balconies and creeping through shattered windows as though nature were silently reclaiming what once belonged to it. Tree trunks rose from the middle of the road, weeds pierced through cracks in the asphalt, transforming the city into a post-apocalyptic forest. Dim sunlight broke through gray clouds, covering the landscape in cold, sorrowful tones. In the distance, the remaining towers faded into a thin layer of mist, creating a sense of mystery and loneliness. A colossal metropolis stretched all the way to the horizon, yet it drowned in the terrifying silence of a forgotten world. The skyscrapers that once symbolized power and prosperity now stood isolated like giant skeletons against time. The towers, built with luxurious architecture of pointed rooftops and classical facades, were now heavily damaged, shattered windows, crumbling concrete, black voids marking the scars of collapse. Across rooftops, balconies, and walls, dense greenery spread wildly like waves of nature devouring floor after floor. Far away, the skyline still hinted at more modern buildings, fading into the mist and cold light of late morning. A silver-gray sky cast an atmosphere, both gloomy and mesmerizing over the entire city. Weak sunlight slipped through the clouds, reflecting against the remaining shards of glass. The colossal Colosseum arena stood round and majestic, yet eroded by time and destruction until only a cracked gray stone skeleton remained. Rows of ancient arches stacked upon one another created a sense of grandeur, but within them lay only deep emptiness, dark and cold. The central arena floor was split apart, covered in weeds and vines crawling down the seating tiers like green fingers tightening around the last relic of old civilization. Around the arena lay gigantic stone blocks ripped from the earth, piled together like the aftermath of a horrifying battle. Farther away, modern skyscrapers still stood blurred within gray mist. Pale light from the clouded sky illuminated the weathered stone walls. At the center of the ruined arena stood Frieza, an alien being motionless, cold, arrogant, and overflowing with murderous intent. A metallic silver bio-armor covered his body, reflecting the cold gray light of the overcast sky. Glossy black-purple sections on his head and shoulders gave him an appearance both organic and mechanical, a creature engineered perfectly for war. His glowing red eyes burned like infernal embers within an emotionless face. That gaze conveyed not only rage, but the aura of one who held dominion over life and death itself. Behind him, the ancient stands had collapsed, rubble scattered across the ground. The atmosphere was suffocating with tension, as though within seconds the entire arena would explode beneath unimaginable power. Rushing forward at blinding speed, a black-haired warrior tore through the atmosphere like a living arrow. His familiar orange gi whipped violently in the wind Goku in the instant before a destined battle. The scene radiated power and urgency, as though he were racing toward the final battle before it was too late. Trunks, a young man with striking silver-blue hair, clenched his teeth and stared ahead with fierce tension, as though pouring all his strength into a decisive moment. Muscles tightened beneath his sleeveless shirt, tattoos visible like scars from a brutal past. Both hands gripped the sword tightly, the blade reflecting cold light with deadly sharpness. A warrior standing amid the ruins of the old world. Broken stones and twisted roots surrounded his feet. A moment of unbearable tension, as though one more heartbeat would ignite a battle for survival. Trunks lunged forward, head lowered, face twisted in a roar of fury, his silver hair whipped wildly with the movement, shadowing eyes burning with fighting spirit. The sword was now gripped in one hand, its tip aimed toward the ground, slicing through the air as he drove all his strength downward. The instant the blade struck the earth felt like a hammer blow, dust and debris erupting upward into a haze around his feet. Flashes of light burst on the right side, resembling electricity or energy leaking from the impact. Behind him, ruined buildings and hanging vines remained silent witnesses to a fallen world. Yet here stood one warrior, one sword, and a single strike carrying enough fury to shatter the deadly silence. Trunks stood upright, motionless like a statue carved from willpower. Both hands rested atop the hilt of the sword planted vertically before him, the blade embedded deep within cracked earth. This was no longer an attack, it was control. The dangerous stillness after power had already been unleashed. His face hardened, eyes staring straight ahead, sharp as steel. No more screaming, no more explosion, only absolute focus, as though every emotion had been compressed into a single point. Silver hair hung over his forehead, casting shadows that made his gaze seem deeper and impossible to read. Around him, the ruined city became clearer, hollow skyscrapers with vines hanging like green scars across the corpse of civilization. Mist drifted between the structures, softening sharp edges, while making the world feel colder and more distant. A quiet moment, yet far from peaceful. As though at any second, with the slightest movement, the entire world around him would shatter once more. Trunks' mouth opened wide in a scream that tore through space itself, every muscle in his neck straining like cords pulled to their limit. His eyes widened, burning with uncontrollable intensity, not merely rage, but the release of a long-suppressed power. Silver hair rose slightly with the motion, falling chaotically across his forehead, while tightly furrowed brows formed deep creases of pain and determination. Cold light struck his face directly, highlighting every detail from gritted teeth to veins pounding beneath his skin. Behind him, the ruined city dissolved into a blurred backdrop. Everything, the setting, the world itself, fell away, surrendering entirely to this single moment. Trunks continued screaming, but now he was no longer human as before. His hair erupted into blazing gold, standing upright as though lifted by an invisible force. His eyebrows glowed with the same burning hue, while his sharpened eyes radiated supernatural fury. Golden lightning bolts ripped across the frame, coiling around his body like electric serpents, cracking the air with violent bursts. Light radiated from within him, expanding into a blazing aura that overwhelmed even the ruined buildings behind him, reducing them to distant shadows before his rising power. Veins bulged along his neck and temples as though his body struggled to withstand the transformation. His scream was no longer merely sound, it became a shockwave pushing everything away, signaling his evolution into something entirely different. This was no longer simple anger. This was awakening. A violent, uncontrollable power had just been unleashed. Super Saiyan. At the center of the gigantic ancient arena swallowed by time, Son Goku hovered in midair, his body small yet carrying the weight of the world itself. His blazing orange gi stood out against the dark blue and cold gray tones of the ruins like the final flame remaining in a devastated world. Arms spread wide, body angled toward the arena floor, he appeared ready to descend into a battle of destiny. Soft yet gloomy light covered the entire scene. Ruined arches and passageways dark as cavern mouths surrounded him, while the hero stood upon the threshold of a battle that would shake the world. Inside the ruined arena, where time had crushed every trace of former glory, cracked stone steps encircled the central battleground. Moss-covered walls and hanging vines clung to the ancient structure like green scars. The atmosphere was so dense and silent that even a single breath felt capable of shaking the moment apart. Son Goku landed within the arena, feet planted firmly upon fractured stone. His fists clenched, shoulders tensed, his entire body like a spring compressed to its limit. His orange gi burned vividly amid the cold gray ruins, signaling the imminent eruption of an energy storm. Opposite him stood Frieza alone at the center of the battlefield. His compact form radiated danger, his white and purple body reflecting dim light like living metal. He remained motionless, cold and calm, making his presence more terrifying than any roar. The two warriors stood separated by silent emptiness, yet between them raged an invisible earthquake. Stones cracked beneath their feet, wind whispered through the dark corridors, and weeds trembled as though in fear. Frieza, the embodiment of cold, overwhelming presence. His smooth white skin reflected the daylight in a lifeless way, contrasting with the glossy purple patches on his head and shoulders, making his body resemble a creature forged from living metal rather than flesh and blood. But the most terrifying thing lay in his blazing red eyes, glowing like embers in the darkness, a gaze that carried not only murderous intent, but also a twisted pleasure in the suffering of others. That smile stretched unnaturally wide, revealing sharp teeth and a sickening sense of enjoyment. It was not the roar of anger, nor the rage of someone out of control, it was the laughter of someone who knew he held the lives of others in his hands. His head tilted slightly to one side, his posture completely relaxed. There was no sign of urgency, no trace of tension, only the absolute confidence of a tyrant who had never known defeat. A villain who did not even need to strike to freeze the air itself. And with just a smile, he turned the entire battlefield into an execution ground. Looking up towards Son Goku, even the earth itself seemed to be watching the warrior standing among the ancient ruins. His dust-covered orange gi stood out against the wild greens and the gray tones of crumbling stone, making him the only bright presence in the frame. His fists tightened at his sides, the muscles in his arms visibly tensed, his stance ready like a warrior who had just heard the call of battle. His face turned slightly into the distance, his eyes wary yet calm. Not fear, but the complete focus of someone accustomed to standing before enemies stronger than himself. His black spiked hair swayed lightly in the wind, creating the feeling that energy was quietly gathering around his body. He stood there like a declaration that the Saiyan spirit had not yet been broken. Frieza. His eyes burned bright red like twin furnaces from hell, the light piercing out from his sockets, reflecting the twisted fury within. Rings of light spiraled deep inside his pupils, giving the feeling that anyone who looked into them would be swallowed by a power completely out of control. His mouth opened wide in a screaming laugh, exposing rows of sharp white teeth and the endless darkness deep within his throat. It was no longer the laughter of joy, but the sound of someone reveling in destruction. Every vein along his neck, every tensed muscle, revealed energy compressing to the point it could tear the air apart. His cold white skin and the glossy purple sections on his shoulders and the top of his head made him look like a flawless statue brought to life solely to spread catastrophe. The contrast between his refined appearance and his savage expression made the scene even more unsettling. It was the moment the villain cast aside his calm facade. When the smile turned into a roar, the entire battlefield understood that the game was over and the battle was about to begin. Goku stood firm at the center of the arena, his legs spread wide, his body drawn tight like a bowstring before release. A burst of blue light exploded from his hands, gathering into a blazing sphere of energy. Small bolts of electricity flashed and coiled around the light like living serpents, radiating a feeling both beautiful and dangerous. The glow illuminated his face from below, emphasizing his expression of absolute concentration, jaw clenched, eyes locked onto the target ahead. The air around him seemed to tremble. Dust beneath his feet was thrown upward by an invisible force, forming small spiraling vortices. Pebbles rolled away as though the earth itself could no longer withstand the power being unleashed. White lightning tore across the sky on both sides of the frame, as though the heavens themselves had been dragged into the battle. Each flash illuminated the swirling clouds of dust below earth, and stone lifted and shaken, reacting to a source of energy beyond natural limits. Behind him, the ancient stone steps and collapsed arches formed a ruined yet majestic backdrop, now transformed into the stage for a fateful moment. Son, Goku, wielding power beyond all limits, prepared to unleash an attack capable of changing everything.